There are places in the world that seem ordinary during the day. Places where children play cricket, where buses run on schedule, where shopkeepers argue over tea prices. Places that appear completely normal until night falls. And then something changes. The road in this story was one of those places. Officially, it was called Route 27, a state highway cutting through nearly 80 kilometers of dense forest in central India. On maps, it was unremarkable. No famous landmarks, no historical significance, no reason for anyone outside the district to ever hear its name. Yet among locals, Route 27 carried a reputation. Not a public reputation, not something discussed openly, more like a secret everyone quietly shared. Drivers avoided it after midnight. Truckers refused to stop within the forest. Villagers living nearby locked their doors before the final night bus entered the trees. And nobody could explain exactly why, because whenever someone tried, the story sounded ridiculous. They would simply say, "The forest remembers people," and leave it at that. Nobody knew what that meant. Not until December of 1998, when a bus conductor named Samir Patil witnessed something that changed everything.
Ticket,
Samir
please.
was not the kind of man who believed
Thank you.
in ghosts.
I've heard all the stories. I don't believe them.
At 38 years old, he had spent nearly half his life working public transportation. Every night he counted passengers, collected tickets, resolved arguments, and dealt with every type of person imaginable. Superstitions bored him. Ghost stories annoyed him. He trusted numbers, facts, things he could verify, which is exactly why his testimony terrified people. Because Samir wasn't telling a story, he was reporting an observation, and his observation was impossible. The last departure left Chandrapur at 10:45 p.m.
Final call for Route 27 to Nagpur. Departing now.
23 passengers boarded.
23 all accounted for.
Samir counted them personally. 23, not 22, not 24, 23. The bus entered the forest shortly before midnight. Most passengers fell asleep. The engine hummed steadily. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Everything was normal. Until a young man suddenly stood up. He looked toward the rear of the bus and froze. Not startled, not confused, frozen. His face lost all color. His hands began trembling. Samir approached him. "What's wrong?" The young man didn't answer. He continued staring toward the back row. Finally, he whispered, "My brother is sitting there." Samir frowned. "What?" "My brother," the young man pointed. "Back there." Samir looked. A figure sat in the last row, male, mid-20s, thin-build, dark shirt, perfectly ordinary. The conductor almost laughed, until the young man added 4 words. "He died 2 years ago." The bus suddenly felt colder. Samir told himself it was nonsense. Coincidence. Someone who looked similar. Nothing more. He started walking toward the back. The figure never moved, never blinked, never looked away. Just sat silently watching the aisle, watching Samir approach. Row after row. Closer, closer, closer. Then the bus hit a pothole. Samir looked away for less than a second. When he looked back, the seat was empty. Completely empty. No passenger, no movement, no explanation. Just an empty seat. The young man began crying, and nobody on that bus slept again. But that wasn't what frightened Samir most. Because 15 minutes later, while checking tickets, he discovered something impossible. There wasn't an extra passenger. There were 23 tickets, 23 people, exactly the same number that had boarded, meaning whoever sat in that seat was never counted, never boarded, and according to the young man, had died 2 years earlier. At that moment, Samir thought the night was over. He was wrong, because before the bus reached its destination, someone else would see a familiar face. And this time, the face would speak. The next morning, Samir told himself there had to be an explanation. There always was. After 12 years on the job, he had seen passengers hallucinate from exhaustion. He had seen mistaken identities. He had seen panic spread through a crowd because of nothing more than a rumor. Human beings were unreliable witnesses, especially at midnight, especially inside a dark bus. By sunrise, he had almost convinced himself the previous night hadn't happened. Almost. But there was one thing he couldn't explain. The young man's reaction. It wasn't fear. It wasn't surprise. It was grief. The kind of grief that comes from seeing someone you thought you'd never see again. And that expression haunted Samir all day. When evening arrived, he considered requesting a different route. Instead, he reported for duty, because he wanted answers, whether he admitted it or not. The truth was simple. Route 27 had gotten under his skin, and now he needed to know why. The second night began normally, too normally. The sky was clear, the roads were dry. Passenger count 21. Nothing unusual. No strange passengers, no disturbances, no reports. By midnight, the bus was moving smoothly through the forest. Samir actually felt relieved. Maybe the previous night really had been a misunderstanding. Maybe the route wasn't haunted. Maybe people were simply telling themselves stories. Then an elderly woman boarded at a small roadside stop just before the forest. Samir noticed her immediately, not because she looked unusual,
Nobody boards
but
there.
because nobody ever boarded there. The stop existed on paper, yet almost nobody used it, especially after dark. The woman wore a faded blue shawl, silver hair, thin frame. She carried no luggage, no handbag, nothing, just herself. She paid cash, exact fare, not a rupee more, not a rupee less. Then she quietly moved to a window seat near the middle of the bus and stared outside for nearly an hour, without moving, without blinking, without speaking. Passengers gradually fell asleep. The bus settled into silence. Only the engine remained, a low mechanical growl beneath the darkness. Then something happened. A young mother sitting near the front suddenly gasped. The sound was so sharp that several passengers woke instantly. Samir hurried over. The woman was pale, terrified, staring at the elderly passenger. "What happened?" Samir asked. The young mother pointed, her hand shaking violently. "I know her." Samir looked toward the old woman. The passenger remained seated, motionless, watching the forest. "Who is she?" he asked. The young mother's eyes filled with tears. "My grandmother." The words barely escaped her lips. Samir frowned. "Maybe they look alike." The woman slowly shook her head. "No." A pause. Then, "My grandmother died when I was 15. The bus fell silent. Several nearby passengers had heard. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Outside, endless trees slid past the windows. Inside, the temperature seemed to drop. Samir suddenly felt very uncomfortable. Not because he believed her, because he didn't. And somehow, that was worse. Because if she was wrong, why did she sound so certain? The old woman remained in her seat for 20 minutes, 30, 40, never moving, never speaking. Then the young mother stood, ignoring Samir's warnings, ignoring everyone. She slowly walked down the aisle toward the elderly passenger, one step at a time. The bus felt impossibly quiet. Even the engine sounded distant. The young mother stopped beside the seat. Her breathing became ragged. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Dadi?" The old woman turned, very slowly. Every passenger watching held their breath and smiled. Not a frightening smile, not malicious. Something far worse. A loving smile. The kind a grandmother gives her grandchild. The young woman immediately collapsed into tears. Several passengers looked away. The moment felt too personal, too intimate, too impossible. Then the old woman spoke. Just 4 words. Words only the young woman could hear. The young mother's expression changed instantly. From grief to horror, absolute horror. She stumbled backward, nearly falling. Samir rushed forward. "What did she say?" The woman couldn't answer. She kept staring at the seat, unable to speak, unable to breathe, unable to look away. Then the bus entered a sharp curve. For a second, everyone lost sight of the elderly passenger. Just a second, nothing more. But when the bus straightened again, the seat was empty. The old woman was gone, vanished. No movement, no footsteps, no open door, nothing. Just an empty seat. The young mother began screaming. The bus stopped. Passengers demanded answers. People searched every row, every corner, every inch of the vehicle. Nothing. The elderly woman had disappeared. And the worst part? Nobody could find her ticket. Samir checked his pouch 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. The fare she paid was gone. The ticket stub was gone. The transaction itself had vanished, as if she had never boarded, as if she had never existed. Yet 21 passengers had watched her. 21 people. The same impossible pattern. Again and again and again. Something was happening on Route 27. Something intelligent. Something deliberate. But the night still wasn't over. Because after the bus reached town, the young mother finally revealed what the old woman had whispered. And what she said made every person in the depot afraid to drive the route ever again. The old woman had smiled, looked directly into her eyes and said, "Don't worry, child. They'll let me leave soon." Then she pointed toward the forest and added, "But they're still waiting for the others."